Right, I think we can get started. It's now 9 o'clock and pretty well everyone seems to be here. Well done, ACM members. This is a webinar on how to successfully fill out your community license pre-application for a CASA, for a community radio station. And our presenter today is Trevor Grange. Welcome, Trevor. It's really good to have you here. Yeah, Trevor and I, we've both been in this industry for some time. Trevor has done so well in keeping up to date with ICASA, and he comes into broadcasting from a technical background. We have that in common as well. But he's worked at Transnet, Siemens, and Centec. Great to have that Centec background. And he's a director now of Big Nine ICT. And they have been very successful in helping applicants, with their community radio applications with ICASA. I think part of it is that his office, he says, is in kind of stone's throw of ICASA, and if he doesn't win, he throws stones at them. But it is an advantage. He serves on the boards of Akaka Radio, SACRO, that's South African Community Radio Organization, and the DRM, South Africa Group. DRM is one of the possible new digital audio formats for new digital radio. There's a BCom Honors and NPI Silver Award. So, Trevor, it's really good to have you here. And Trevor will be doing a presentation, including going through how to fill out the application form. And he will run through the Forms B and the Form P, which are the main ones that you need to complete. And that presentation should be over by 10 o'clock. And then there'll be half an hour for questions. If you'd like to put your questions as you go along, just type them into the chat and we'll go through those at the end. Trevor's not going to stop and answer questions along the way. Those we will sort out at the end. Trevor, just to introduce, it's just, okay, let me see if I can get my thing here so that I can see everyone. Just the participants, those on this workshop, Tebogo Siko, that's Bloemfontein. Tapeleng comes from Vereniging area. Bongi Moyo, Bango is representing the Methodist Church group. Jan Otto is broadcasting Radio Alpha in Badplaas in Mpumalanga, just preparing for a license renewal. Good News Community Radio, Durban, also preparing for license renewal. Titch Link FM is East London, and Luke Lunga, also Mpumalanga area, with a new application. He's already had experience in running 2 other community radio stations, one in KZN and one in Nelspruit. So welcome everyone, and hand over to you, Trevor. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And welcome to everyone. Let's get started. Now my slides won't progress. There we go. Okay, so there's just a brief introduction. I'll tell you a little bit about our company, Big Nine ICT. Then we'll look at the main reason for us being together today, which is the ITPR 2021. and then questions and answers. As David has mentioned, please make a note of any comments, questions, and then we'll attend to those at the end of the presentation. Obviously, it's an honor for me to be here and to be part of the ACM online training series. So thank you for that, David and Natalie. Just something about our company. We were registered on the 6th of April 2016. Queen is our sales and marketing director. We've done work with Alex FM, LM Radio, which is a commercial medium wave station here in Gauteng. Mokopane FM, Zebediela FM, both in Limpopo. Kanyamazani FM in Nelspruit, Radio Kingfisher in Geberga, Radio Bushbuck Ridge in Mpumalanga, Kashlamba in Escort, and Vision FM also in Limpopo. So what we do is we supply, install, and commission broadcast transmitters, studio links, audio processors, RDS encoders, etc. We also supply studio equipment and services, but that we do through our studio partner, which is BNI, located here in Gauteng, but they apparently service the entire country. We also provide consulting services, project management services, and my contact information you can see there on screen. Okay, so we're on to the nitty-gritty. The ITPR was issued on the 15th of December 2021, as we all know. It closes on the 30th of June 2022. The application fee payable is 4,118 Rand. And the application must be addressed for the attention of the Executive, Licensing and Compliance, and it must be sent to the email address itpr@icasa.org.za. What is very important is that before you complete your application forms, you need to read on page 4 of the Government Gazette 45650, which was also dated the 15th of December, the regulations and guidelines. If you don't read this, you might miss some important compliance issues in completing your application. And for those of you that also attend the workshops that were conducted by ICASA recently, you will note that they stressed the issue of compliance in terms of your application. So in general, your application must consist of a cover page, followed by a contents page, and then all of the detail from there the pages must each be numbered sequentially from page 1 all the way to your last page. You must be registered as a non-profit organization or a non-profit company for at least 2 years before the 30th of June 2022. If not, ICASA will just disregard your application. More importantly, you must also be able to prove that you've done work in the community in the past 2 years. This ICASA has brought into play because some applicants use a NPO or NPC, a shelf company, and then use that to do the application. It's important to ICASA that you must be able to prove that you are committed to working in the community. That's why you're applying for the community radio license, and that's why they require you to prove the work done. We'll touch on this a bit later again. You must also apply for a frequency that is on the ICASA list that was listed in the Government Gazette dated the 15th of December 21. If you apply for a frequency that is not on the list, ICASA will summarily disregard or discard your application. Part of your application must also include a mandate to apply. The mandate to apply must come from the board. We've had instances where the station manager of the radio station sends a mandate to apply, appointing himself. That's not acceptable to ICASA. So typically what will happen is, and I'll go through the detail, I'll give you some idea on what should be included in the mandate. We can do that right now. So what the mandate must consist of, firstly, it must be on a letterhead of the applicant or the radio station or the NPO or NPC. And it must be called or headed Appendix 11.5 of Form B. That's important to ICASA because we want all appendixes to state it must be of Form B, and that's because there's more than one form involved. So typically a mandate to apply will be headed mandate to apply for a community sound broadcasting service license, a radio spectrum license, and or an ECNS license. So I'm going to read to you the wording just so that you have an idea of typically the way it is worded. At a properly constituted meeting of the board of the radio station name, held at wherever the board meeting was held, at what time and on what date, the following resolution was adopted. 1. The radio station would apply for a community sound broadcasting license and associated licenses from ICASA. And 2, that the following 2 persons are authorized to apply for the above licenses on behalf of the radio station. Then you give the name, the ID number, the mobile phone number, and the email address of the first person authorized. And you repeat that for the second person. And then the mandate is signed by the chairperson of the board of the radio station. Obviously, it must also be dated, the actual mandate. And then in terms of being compliant with the Companies Act, just a pointer, typically on your letterhead, you must name the directors of the NPC or NPO. Okay, then the next item that is required is the signed and certified Form B. You will notice that the last page of Form B, and we'll go through Form B in detail later on. The last page of Form B requires the authorized person, as authorized in the mandate, to sign on behalf of the radio station, and that must then be certified typically by a commission of oaths or at your local South African police station. You also need to submit a copy of your proof of payment. So once you've paid your 4,118 Rand into the bank account of ICASA, you need to print that proof of payment and then add it to the application. What you also need to do is you need to make a decision on confidentiality. The application allows you to declare some of your information as confidential. And if that is your decision, then I think there's another 5 pages of application that you need to complete. Just a comment from my side, we normally recommend to decline on confidentiality, and that is basically just because it's a lot of additional work for information that is not typically considered as confidential. The reason why I say that is, for instance, you don't need to declare in your application who your clients are, who your customers are, your advertising customers that advertise on your radio station and that bring you the advertising revenue. So that's normally our recommendation, to say no, confidentiality is not required. Then the next thing you need to information that you need to provide to ICASA in your application is community participation, in basically how you allow the community to participate in the running of the radio station, but obviously more focused on the programming and the programming content. You also need to indicate how you, as the radio station, will contribute to community development. And typically that is done by allowing members of the community to participate in the radio station, either as interns, or in any case on a temporary basis, so that you can give them some opportunity to develop in the radio broadcasting field. You also need to then advise ICASA how you contribute to community empowerment. And typically that is done by empowerment is done by providing information and knowledge. That's how you empower your community. ICASA also requires you to indicate to them the business demand, need, and support. So this is now focused on business rather than on the community. So typically here, the businesses will want to advertise on your radio station, and that creates a demand for your services. And the reason why they want to advertise on your radio station is because they have products and services that they want to sell to members of the community, and they will use your radio station for that purpose, and therefore they have created a demand for the services of your radio station. You then similarly have to advise ICASA on the business needs for a radio station in the area. And typically here you can use examples like there might be a community newspaper in the area, but the community newspaper is published once a month. So that's not very effective in terms of the business needs. And then also very important, business support. So the business will support the radio station typically by advertising on the radio station, but you can also get support from the businesses in the area, in your local area, by contributing funds. So if you need capital to purchase equipment, etc., then some local businesses may support you in that regard. The next item is completing Form B. So at this stage, I'm going to talk you through Form B in detail. Please do make notes, because as you are aware, there's a lot of detail to be provided in Form B. So Form B, we start with the full name of the registrant, which is the radio station, followed by the designated contact persons, maximum of 2. So you provide the names of the 2 authorized persons according to the mandate. You then provide your principal place of business, which is typically the studio address, street address. And you then provide your postal address of the radio station, followed by telephone numbers, which must include the mobile numbers. After that, item 1.6, you need to provide your telefax number. And this goes to the next item on the slide, which you can see in front of you. A lot of us no longer use telefax. So if you are not using a telefax, you will insert in that slot not applicable. But ICASA specifically wants you to say, if you use the term not applicable, why is it not applicable? So in this case, you typically say not applicable, not in use, or no longer in use, or all technology, or whatever word you wish to use. And then item 7, you need to give the email address of the designated contact persons, the 2 that were mentioned in the mandate. On to item 2, then, which is the legal form of the registrant. On item 0.1, you'll either put NPC or NPO. And on 2.2, you'll give the registration number of the registrant, which is either the NPC number or the NPO number. Going on to item 3, you'll see that you need to include this information as appendix 3 of Form B in your application. Okay, I see 2.3, which is very important. Appendix 2.3.1 of Form B is where you must put your constitutive documents as well as your registration document. And there you can see that ICASA has highlighted the important items that must be in your constitution. The minimum of 51% as a quorum for the annual meeting. You must have a mechanism for applying for membership at the radio station. And you must also have an appeals mechanism. So if I apply to become a member at your radio station and you reject my application, I must be able to appeal, and typically that appeal goes to the board of the radio station. And then, of course, also very important, clear separation of powers between management and the board of directors. So typically here, the station is managed, the day-to-day operations, by the station manager and his or her team, and the board of directors is not allowed or permitted to interfere in the day-to-day running. However, that does not mean that they can't ask questions at the board meetings, and obviously if something drastically goes wrong at the radio station, then the board also has the right to intervene.
Trevor, sorry, can I just interrupt a sec? When
Sure.
you look quite far to your left, we're
does
losing
the voice go?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave. I'll try and put the paper in front of me. That will be better. Thank you for that. So, okay, we're still on to Form B then on item 3, the non-profit status. Here you'll see ICASA requires a certified certificate of your registration document, and you must call this Appendix 3 of Form B in your application. Under item 4.1.1, then ICASA requires you to state whether you are a geographic or common interest applicant. So are you serving a community in a geographic area or a community of interest? And then you'll see that Appendix 4.2 requires you to give the demographic information, either of the geographic or the community of interest community. On demographics typically you'll get from your local municipality website. It gives you details about the population, the breakdown of the population in terms of gender. It also gives you details about how many households are in the local municipality, water and electricity supply, etc. And then, as indicated, that will be attached as Appendix 4.2 if it's a geographic community, and 4.3 if it's a community of interest. Then we're on to Appendix 5.1, which is the service description, which must be attached as Appendix 5.1 of Form B. Typically, the service description just describes the service that you as a radio station will be providing, and that basically is a free-to-air sound radio service. The important point to note here is to stress that it's a free-to-air radio service, and that it's provided to the community. And you can expand at your own discretion in terms of if you want to expand on some elements of the content, news versus talk versus music. Okay. So we're moving on to the next slide now, which takes us to Appendix 5.5. And Appendix 5.5, okay, before I get this, sorry, I see I've skipped a few items on the Form B. On the Form B, you'll notice that clause 5.1 and 5.2 specifically says that it's only for special event and community TV. It obviously does not apply to you as an applicant for a community radio license. So what you would typically put under clause 5.2.1 is not applicable, as this is an application for a permanent license in terms of the ITPR issued on the 15th of December 2021. Similarly, 5.3, you'll say not applicable, and you'll just refer them back to item 5.2.1. I'm not sure if I'm going too fast, Dave. I'm hoping that everyone is keeping up.
No, seems okay to me. I'm following fine. But if anyone has a problem, just put something in the chat and I can feed it back. Thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you. So on Form B, on item 5.4, you need to indicate the geographic area in which the service is to be provided. And bear in mind that even if you are serving a community of interest, there's still a geographic area involved in terms of the location of the transmitter. So you will need to fill in something there on the Form B under item 5.4. Item 5.5 then addresses languages, as you can see, Appendix 5.5. And typically what you'll do on your Form 5.5, your Form B 5.5, you'll just list the languages and the percentages, and you provide further detail, if necessary, in the actual appendix in the application. Under item 5.6 then is your programming schedule details. So here you can expand on talk versus music, languages again, and then your detailed programming schedule, which should be Monday to Sunday, 24/7. Please don't leave any gaps on your programming schedule, because then it looks as if you don't really know what you're doing. That's the way CASA views it. Item 5.7 on Form B you can ignore because it's to do with special event community applications. Item 6.1 then, on the form you will just insert see Appendix 6.1 of Form B, and then the detail of serving the community you will put in the actual appendix document. So serving the community is basically, you'll address giving the community a voice so they can use the radio station to voice their opinions about matters that concern them locally. So it could be service delivery issues, for instance. It could be crime. It could be gender-based violence. It could be anything. It could just be a chat show that the radio station is hosting. But you are serving the community expressly by giving them access to the radio station and by allowing them to call into the radio station. They can come onto your website, they can send you emails, they can send you SMSs, WhatsApp, etc. On Form B, then you also say under item 6.2, see Appendix 6.2 of Form B. And in Appendix 6.2, you'll address the programming council and the process around that. So typically here you will say, how will you approach the community to form the programming council? What will the programming council consist of? In other words, here you want to ensure that you are encouraging all sectors in the community to participate in the programming council. And also important to ICASA is that your programming council should typically have representatives from all the wards in your local community. So for instance, if there are 8 wards in your local municipality, please make sure that your programming council has got at least 1 member from each ward. That's important to ICASA because it illustrates to them that you are covering the entire community. You're not focusing just on 1 ward in the municipality. You're making sure that you cover the entire community. Then item 7 on Form B, you will attach as Appendix 7 of Form B then your business and community support. So what you do here is under business, you get letters of support from businesses in your local community. And those letters basically just say, it's on the company letterhead, it will say, we support radio so-and-so to obtain a license from ICASA to broadcast in our local community, something like that. And then in terms of community support, this is where you get the signatures of support from the local community. Again, what is important here is that you make sure that you cover all of the wards so that ICASA can again see that you are covering the entire community and not just a section of the community. The recommendation here, and let me just share with you, because obviously we have been through most of the previous applications in 2019. The one case that we picked up was that there was in terms of community support and signatures, there was one applicant that had just 50 signatures. That typically to ICASA will not illustrate that you have got community support. So our recommendation is to have at least 1,000 signatures. And what we typically also do is we provide for 20 signatures on a page. So if you have 50 of those pages completed with details from members of the community, typically name, contact number, gender, and if you can, include the ward number, then that acts as the community support, which illustrates to ICASA that indeed you do have the community support for your application. Then on 8.1 in Appendix or in Form B, 8.1 requests letters of commitment for funding, and you must state the manner of funding. So if we start with the manner of funding, it's typically donations from local businesses or individuals. It can be grants from, for instance, MDDA or the National Lottery Fund. And you can also say that part of your funding is from membership fees, but it's not recommended in view of it being a community radio station where most people don't have a lot of money to throw around. So in terms of letters of commitments for funding, what is important here is that, again, it must be letters from businesses, preferably in your local community. It must be on the business letterhead. It must state that a certain amount is committed or allocated or will be provided or given to the radio station, and typically for what purpose. What is important here, if we look at the next item, which is item 8.2, the CAPEX budget, please make sure, because this is what ICASA is going to check. So if you don't check it, believe me, ICASA will. You must make sure that your letters of commitment for funding, the total amount, at least matches or exceeds the amount that you say you need in the CAPEX budget. So typically, if in the CAPEX budget you say we need 1.5 million, please make sure that you have letters of commitment that cover the 1.5 million. If you don't, be assured that ICASA will question that, and they will come back to you and say, but you've told us that you need 1.5 million. You only have commitment for 800,000. So how can we support your application? Please be careful of that pitfall. On to Appendix 8.2 then, which is the CAPEX budget. So the CAPEX budget here, you need to cover all the capital that you require for equipment that you don't already have. So for instance, if you already have studio equipment, please don't go and include it in your CAPEX budget, because it's just increasing your CAPEX budget unnecessarily. And it's actually forcing you to get letters of commitment for funding to cover that amount. So it doesn't make sense to ask for something that you already have, or to ask for funding for something that you already have. So the recommendation here is keep your CAPEX budget to the items that you really require. Then make sure that you've got that backed up by letters of commitments for funding, and then you should be fine. And then in terms of Appendix 8.2, you also need to provide an OPEX budget, operating budget for year one. And that just means you must be able to indicate to ICASA all the running costs or the operational costs of the radio station for the year. Remember that in your business plan, you need to include revenue figures. So please make sure that your revenue figures in your business plan exceed the OPEX budget for year one in your OPEX budget. If it doesn't, believe me, ICASA will come back and question it, and potentially disregard or reject your application as a result. So on to Appendix 8.3, which is your business plan. I've seen business plans that range from 1 page to 33 pages. And typically a proper business plan is going to be at least 20 pages. What you can do, if I may give you some advice, you can go onto the MDDA website, and the MDDA has got a business plan template which you can download and use, and that addresses all of the items that you need to include in your business plan. On to Appendix 9.1, which requires the board and management details, their CVs, and their disclosure of interest. Please make sure that you provide the board details, the members, all the members of the board, and all the members of the management. Their details are required. The details are typically name, position, ID number, race, gender, and home address. The reason for this is ICASA wants to get confirmation that the board members are all resident within the coverage area of the radio station. So for instance, if I would want to join the board of a radio station in KZN, that would not be allowed, because there's no ways that I can be considered to be within the the coverage area of a radio station in KZN. Include, please, all the board members, all the management members, their CVs, and then also important disclosure of interest. So the disclosure of interest must come from, again, all the board members, all the management members. It typically must say that I do not have an interest in the programming on the radio station, and I do not have an interest in doing business with the radio station. This is just to avoid conflict of interest and that people abuse their position on the board or on the management to obtain business for their private businesses. Appendix 9.2 then requires the board and management organograms. Please make sure that you include both. And, oh my goodness, I just spotted a spelling error. My apologies. But organograms doesn't sound too bad. It doesn't. My apology, people. Okay, so please make sure that you include the board organogram and the management organogram, and they should be separate. And typically on your board organogram, you will show the station manager as an ex officio member of the board. For those that are unclear on that matter, ex officio just means that the station manager serves on the board as an observer, has no voting rights. And that is to make it convenient for the station manager to understand the board's instructions and then to go and implement them at the radio station. Appendix 9.3 covers ownership interest, and here is also very important. Some applicants have made the fatal error of providing shareholder details, etc. Remember, please, this is a community radio application. The ownership of the radio station resorts with the community, not with the board, not with the management. What you do need to indicate here, though, in terms of the ownership interest, is the previously disadvantaged group percentages in terms of the board and the management. That is what ICASA requires there. And then we have gone through most of what is on Form B. Please just bear in mind, I see I skipped 9.3.1. Well, I'm on to 9.3.1 now, I should say. It's details of persons in a position of control and foreigners. In your board and management details, you can also include that detail to make it easier. Also, under 9.3.1 on Form B, you can just, if that is the case, just type in the word none, N-O-N-E. And then item 9.4, Form B, asks whether a member of the board is also a member of the board of another licensee. And if that is the case, you just say no. If it is not the case, you might not get your license application approved. Then we're on to Appendix 10.1, the frequency application Form P. We'll do that once we've completed Form B. And then under item 11.1 asks whether you are a member of an entity recognized in section 54, 55 of the Act. Those are typically organizations like NCRF and NAB and etc. So you either will there say yes or no. And then item 11.2 indicate whether you are a party, movement, organization, body, or alliance, which is of a party political nature. If you should say yes there, your application will be declined. So the standard answer there is no. And obviously, it must be also the correct answer. In terms of 11.3, indicate whether the registrant has been convicted of an offence in terms of the Act or related legislation. Usually the answer here is no. If the answer is yes, you need to then provide details of such convictions. If you are in the unfortunate position here that the answer is yes, please don't take a chance with ICASA and say no, because they have on record all of those who have been convicted of an offence and certainly have been convicted or been found guilty by ICASA of any offence. So the recommendation here is play open cards, put all your cards on the table, be honest in your application, or else, as you'll see later on this Form B, it's possible that your license will, if not immediately be rejected, at some later stage be taken away. If you have anything else to add that you think might be of interest to ICASA in terms of assessing your application, you can put that in under item 11.4. If it's a one-page document or longer, then the suggestion would be refer ICASA under item 11.4 on Form B, see Appendix 11.4 of Form B, and then you attach the details under that item 11.4. 11.5 then is the Appendix 11.5 is the board resolution, which we've already discussed. And then we're on to the last page of the Form B, which is where one of the authorized signatories signs and then has the Commission of Oaths also certify the Form B. So that deals with Form B. I'm going to move on swiftly to Form P, which we're not going to repeat the items which are similar in Form B, and those are things like the applicant's name, the designated contact persons, the place of business, postal address, telephone numbers, telefax numbers, email addresses. And then on item 1.8 on Form P, you'll see that it requests the applicant's service license number. Remember that as an applicant, you do not have this number, so the recommendation is to type in under item 1.8, awaiting outcome of ITPR dated 15 December 2021. Form P then requests a lot of technical detail. That technical detail you will either get from your service provider, which could be Centec or another service provider. Or if you're self-providing, you'll get a service provider to do the technical report for you, which is the next item on the slide, as you can see. So all of that technical detail must be completed. And then on the last page of Form P, you must again sign and have the Form P certified by Commission of Oaths. Okay, the next item on the slide, as you can see, is the technical report. So typically in the technical report, what you will state for ICASA's purposes is the frequency selection. Which frequency did you select and why did you select it? You'll also then have a detailed technical study. Technical study will cover things like the transmitter. It talks a lot to Form P in terms of the technical details in Form P, but it gives ICASA a view of the technical study in terms of the linking between the studio and the transmitter coverage, and you'll see we've also included the recommended that you should also then include a radio coverage map. That's about most of it. So it's the linking between the studio and the transmitter, the details of the transmitter installation, and all of that will talk back to the frequency application in Form P. But typically you will end the technical report with a statement to say that, as can be seen from the technical report, the applicant or the radio station will comply with all of the technical requirements set by ICASA. The next item addresses the completed Form A, which fortunately is not included here, but it's typically Form A as your application for your ECNS license, which you require if you don't have a signal distributor that's doing the signal distribution for you. So here you have an option. If you have an ECNS license, you include a copy of the ECNS license. If you don't have an ECNS license, but you plan to self-provide, then you will include a copy of the completed Form A, which is the application for the ECNS license. And your other option is you then get a copy of your signal distributor agreement. So typically in Centec's case, you'll ask them for an agreement, and let me share with you that according to our information, Centec will tell you that we will only give you an agreement once you have a license, which creates a bit of a challenge. So what you do is you ask Centec to give you a letter of support, supporting your application, and to give you a pro forma agreement. The pro forma agreement then will include all of the details that will be in the agreement once you have your license and you then sign the agreement with Centec. Remember too that if that is the route that you follow, that once you receive your agreement, your signed agreement from Centec, to then forward that to ICASA. The next item on the slide is profiled community broadcasters. So why this information is important to ICASA is because they want to see the uniqueness of your radio station in the area where there are other radio stations, community radio stations broadcasting. So to give you an idea, typically you might have 3 radio stations covering largely the same area, but the reason why ICASA wants to see the profile community broadcasters is they want to be confirmed, or they want to have the confirmation from you that you know what's going on around you. So you know there are other radio stations in place, but you also believe, and that's what you stress in this document, that your radio station will bring a unique service to the community, and that's why ICASA should be giving you the community radio license. Okay, we're on to slide 7. The first item is projects reporting. Now you'll remember that right in the beginning, we were talking about your NPO and your NPC registration, and that registration should have been valid for at least 2 years, but also that ICASA wanted proof of the work that you had been doing in the community. That's what the projects reporting is all about. So under this document, you will put examples of the work that you've done in the community. For instance, you had a campaign where you provided school shoes or stationery to certain schools in your local community. Here you'll show pictures, you'll show letters of letters received from the school to say thank you for your help, etc. That's the information that you put in under project reporting. But what ICASA also wants under project reporting is that you must give a summary of the projects you've done and the financial side of those projects. So what ICASA wants here is they want to be able to see that you can get money donated to you and you can use it sensibly and you can have it recorded, the financial reporting side. So for instance, you'll say, we got a grant or a donation from this company for 20,000 Rand for this purpose. This is what we did with the 20,000 Rand. We bought all of these items to the value of 19,500, and the other 500 we donated to the school for use, for whatever use by them. So it's important here, indicate the activities that you had in the community, but also give some idea on how did you manage each of the projects. Okay, it also gives ICASA, of course, the confidence that when you receive funding from wherever, you will use it for the purpose for which it was intended. The next item that you need to provide is the policies. So it's under the heading corporate governance and policies, and those policies must include, as you can see, they're listed: technical operations, human resources, financial, programming, editorial, social media, political branding, and affiliation. So you need that policy in place because all of those policies will govern the running of the radio station. And ICASA wants to have insight into them to see that you will run and operate this radio station in a proper manner. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail of each policy because that's largely up to each radio station. And bear in mind, please, that the policies are typically put in place by the board. Doesn't mean that the board will write them, but the board will needs to approve the policies of the radio station because they are also responsible and accountable to ICASA for applying those policies properly. Okay, it might be that you complete your application and submit it, and before ICASA makes a decision as to whether to award the license to you or not, that some of the information in your application may change. If that is the case, you need to apply to ICASA in writing to consider the change. ICASA, of course, reserves the right to either accept or reject the change, but that is just what it is. And then note that such application must be made within 14 days of such changes occurring. Bear in mind, please, that whenever ICASA refers to days, they refer to working days. So those 14 days are not 14 calendar days, they are 14 working days. So typically, nearly 3 weeks you have in order to submit that application. Please note that it's not necessary to include in your application a copy of the ITPR document contained in the Government Gazette. It seriously, people, does not serve any purpose. It just makes your application a bit thicker and a bit more difficult to read. I want to share with you, for those of you that attended the ICASA workshops recently, a message that the chairperson of the ICASA workshop shared during the workshop. And I'll read it, although you can also read it and probably have already. This is what he said. He said, if you think that ICASA will give you a license just because you completed the application forms, you are wrong. And he stressed you will receive a license only if the application is found to be fully compliant with all the requirements. And this is where I believe most of the previous applicants may have been found wanting, with all due respect. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the time. I'm not sure how. Oh, exactly 10 o'clock.
Thanks, Trevor. You are spot on, and I really thank you for keeping to time. This has been great. And I think we've gone through pretty well every detail. I have here about 8 questions that I've taken off the chat, some of which I think you've actually answered subsequent to them being posted. The first one, an example of proof of work done in the community. I think that you did explain that in the report on what the NPO has done subsequent to that. Tebogo, has your question been answered, or do you want to, you still got some questions there?
No, it has been answered.
Thank you. The second question, the NPO, in some cases, the NPO that is applying does not mention radio in its articles of incorporation. Is that going to be a problem, in your opinion, Trevor? Okay,
I'm really pleased to get that question, Dave, because it's an issue that I raised with ICASA myself. And ICASA's response is as follows, and I think it does really make a lot of sense. Firstly, ICASA points out that they are not there. Their mandate is not to manage an organization that does not fall under their mandate. So for instance, if I have an NPO, they can't go and manage the NPO requirements or the Companies Act requirements for that matter. So this is the recommendation that ICASA made. Firstly, in the NPO that you are using, you need to amend the constitution of the NPO, and you need to get a board resolution from the NPO to say that you want to start the radio station. Then in terms of the radio station, you need to form your own constitution or your own memorandum of incorporation, so that it addresses all of the requirements that ICASA wants, because that's what ICASA is going to assess you on and to evaluate you on and to check you for compliance on. ICASA can't manage the whole Companies Act and the NPO, whatever the NPO requirements are in terms of compliance. So the recommendation here is, in your NPO that you are using, make that statement that, and get a board resolution that says that you are going to apply for this radio license. But then what you don't need to do is you don't need to go and form another NPC or NPO under the radio station name. But you do need to have your own constitution or your own memorandum of incorporation. I don't know if that addresses it adequately, David.
Yeah. Trevor, I think it does. Just the obvious question there, can those amendments be done now rather than 2 years ago?
Look, remember, yes, to answer the question directly, yes, they can be done now. They must be done, obviously, before the application is submitted. Remember that the requirement is not that you must have an NPO or NPC registered 2 years ago with this and this and this in it. That's not the requirement. The requirement is you must have an NPO and NPC registered for at least 2 years. They're not addressing the detail, and certainly not the detail in terms of the Constitution. But yes, it can be done now. It should be done as soon as possible. because it just formalizes everything. It makes everything logical and reasonable to ICASA when they assess your application.
Great. Thank you so much on that. The other people are confused with this 51% quorum. You know, just spell that out a little bit. I get the understanding of it, but I think it would be good just to spell it out a bit.
Okay, the 51% quorum, and yes, it is a very valid and important issue to clarify. Remember what it applies to. It applies to a 51% quorum at your AGM. Remember, however, that typically your AGM and the 51% quorum refers to members of the radio station, not the community. So, although the AGM is open to the entire community, they do not have voting rights at the AGM. The only people that have voting rights at the AGM are the members in good standing. Okay? And the members in good standing means they are members, paid up their fees, they have no disciplinary actions pending or otherwise against them. That's a member in good standing. So let's say, for instance, and perhaps I'm giving away a little bit of trade secret here, but that's fine. Remember that the radio station and the board is empowered to decide how many members the radio station has. So let's say, for instance, that I'm a radio station, or I'm on the board of a radio station, and we are in a local municipality with 100,000 people. It doesn't mean that we're going to have 100,000 members. In fact, it doesn't make any sense to have 100,000 members. Okay? Because it's unmanageable. There's no ways you're going to keep track, and you're going to have to probably appoint 10 people to manage it, and you can't afford to. You're a community radio station with sometimes limited revenue. So what the board will decide is, as an example, we only want 100 members. So we restrict our membership to 100. What the board then must do, that's their responsibility, is make sure that all of the wards are represented. All of the interest groups within the municipality are represented, whether that be the aged, the youth, other interest groups within the organization. And you could also have I don't know what it's called, LGBT or something. I don't always get that right. But make sure that your membership is representative of the community. But now you limit the membership, say, to 100. In terms of that requirement of a 51% quorum, it means that at the AGM, if I have 100 members, I must have at least 51 present. If I've got 49 present, the AGM cannot continue. If I've got 61, all good and well. And only those 61 are entitled to vote. You can have 10,000 people at the AGM, doesn't matter. But only the 61 members in good standing are allowed to vote. Does that clarify it, I hope, Dave?
I think so. If anyone has any further questions of that, you can just put them into the chat, because I don't want to get sidetracked onto a long discussion on this, but I found that very helpful. Thanks, Trevor. Just coming back to the geographic and community of interest, because this refers also to the quorum issue. In your presentation, you put quite a lot of emphasis on representation from wards within municipality. Now, for example, community of interest, most of our members, Association of Christian Media, most of our members are community of interest Christian radio stations. Not all, but most. Now, representation in that case, would it be Christians in different wards, or would it be different flavors of Christian? Or would that be up to us to make that distinction?
Yes. Again, a very interesting question, David. My view on this is, and I say this to everyone who's involved in community radio, please understand and accept ICASA's authority in this process. And I cut it down to basics by saying the following. If you want ICASA to give you what you want, give ICASA what they want. If ICASA wants you to indicate the ward representativity, please do so. It's if they don't see it, it raises questions, it causes delays, they have to come back and question, etc., etc. Or it might be one of many reasons why you don't get a license. But in terms of the community of interest, let us look at the ideal. The ideal is you serving a community of interest, a Christian community. It would be great if the Christian community is spread across all the wards, because then everyone's happy. So that would be my final answer, if I can play How to Be a Millionaire.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful. Then there was a question about profiling of broadcasters, and you did spell that out a little bit. It's not quite clear, although it may be on the new form, when you're looking at profiling in relation to other broadcasters in the area. Are we only looking at other community broadcasters, or do we include SABC and commercial voices as well?
Okay, again, a good question, and fortunately a fairly easy one to respond to. Your focus is on community broadcasters. The reason for that is simply because ICASA wants to see the uniqueness of your station versus other community broadcasters. You're not competing with the SABC in terms of radio, or with East Coast Radio or OFM or whoever else. You're not competing with the commercial stations. You're going to enter the community radio sector. Therefore, only the other community radio broadcasters are of interest in terms of the application.
Thanks. And then my next question pretty well leads on from that. There are places where there are numbers of geographic community broadcasters, but no community of interest broadcasters. But there are no frequencies available because they're all taken up with these competing geographics. Is there any way into that situation? For me, it's a frustration because ICASA has typically favored geographical, I think. I may be wrong, but it is an issue where we want to introduce diversity, and there is not an opportunity to do it because there are no frequency available on IPTRs. Okay.
Again, I think the answer to this one is fairly apparent because you've actually given the answer in your question, David, and that is that the only opportunity you have is when an ITPR is issued. So typically, if one or more of the geographic licensees slip up and don't renew their license or get their license revoked for non-compliance, etc., and that license becomes available, in terms of the license becoming available, it's actually the frequency becoming available, and then it's exactly the situation where we are in now. just about anybody can apply for that frequency and for that license. So unfortunately, that I think is the only way forward in terms of opportunity.
It should give community of interest stations some advantage in terms of diversity when competing against geographicals.
Yes, I would, in principle, I would agree with that statement because of the diversity angle. And the diversity angle actually addresses the uniqueness of the new applicant as opposed to the existing broadcasters in the area. And that goes back to the profile community broadcaster exercise.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's a little bit of a side spin on this, and there are small towns where there are available frequencies that are not currently covered by community radio. Do you think there's any way to lobby ICASA for IPTRs in these areas?
It's again an interesting question and perhaps a difficult one, because remember how ICASA compiled this ITPR. They looked at all of the existing frequencies in the country, they put them on a list, and they then issued that in conjunction with the terms and conditions of the application. So wherever there are frequencies, if anybody feels that there are frequencies that are not on the ICASA list, they are welcome to approach ICASA formally in writing and indicate that to ICASA and ask ICASA if these frequencies can be included in a future ITPR. But please bear in mind, because it's also a lesson we learned in a very practical way. There are frequencies that are allocated by ICASA, for instance, to the SABC, that are not in use. But because of that allocation, they can't be allocated for community radio. And that's certainly something which in the longer term, I guess we can address, because it's unlikely that the SABC is going to be doing any expansion in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Thanks very much. No, that is very helpful. I've got sort of two further questions here. A number of those participating in this webinar are, I think 3 stations are busy with or preparing to do renewals. Do you have any comment? I haven't looked. The renewal form is a different form, but I think it has many of the same elements to Form B. Do you have any comment about how those applying or preparing for renewal, is there anything different they need to do? Because there have been amendments and changes in the community radio requirements. Is there anything different that stands out to you that they need to be prepared for in the renewal?
Okay, David, I think it's important right up front to differentiate between the two. If I am a radio station who has got an existing license and I'm now in the process, I'm in the 6-month window where I want to renew my license, that's a different process. It's got nothing to do with ITPR. ITPR is for applicants who do not have a license. Those applicants can include first-time applicants, they've never had a license before, and they can include previous licensees. I've had a license before, it was either revoked or I forgot to renew on time, and therefore I lost my license. But those that previously had license are not in a phase or in a stage of renewal. They are no longer regarded as licensees, and they are treated as the first-time license applicants, if that addresses the matter.
Yeah, some of these, there are a few here that are existing, they are current licensees. They are just in the renewal process. And I know from experience with CASA, they don't like taking licenses away. I mean, I know some stations that should never carry on, but they do. And I think most, well, all three of the members that are here in this webinar are running good, compliant operations at the moment. They just want to check if there are any updates they need to make to maintain that good standing.
Okay, in that regard, Dave, they are not formally, or they're not considered as participants in the ITPR. No. They just need to go to the license renewal form and comply with all the requirements in the license renewal form. That's it. They don't have to go through this whole process. They are not bound by the closing date of the 30th of June. They just need to make sure that they apply for renewal within the 6-month window before the termination date of the license. That's the key.
And if there are some new requirements in the new, in what you've been through here that were not there 4 years ago.
Correct, but remember these new requirements are for the ITPR. Okay. What you need to do is to go back and look at the update of the processes and procedures. There you'll see the update of the renewal form, which I don't have at top of mind now. I don't know the form number off by heart, but that's basically all you need to do. Go and look at the policies and procedures update. Alternatively, all you need to do is speak to your local compliance officer. Tell them that you are busy with your license renewal and ask them for guidance. Which form do I need to, form or forms do I need to complete? But it's not tied to this long and fairly complicated process that the ITPR applicants are involved in. It's a far simpler process. I think there's only one form, but I'm speaking under correction. But I think there's only one form that needs to be completed in terms of the license renewal.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it's too difficult. As I said, ICASA won't take a compliant broadcaster off air, and just they can relax on that.
Absolutely not. And I agree with you. The key here is just to stick to the 6-month window. Make sure that you apply for your license renewal in that 6 months window. Don't apply before the 6 months starts, and certainly don't apply after your license is expired, because then you are in a fair bit of trouble.
Yeah. Just, I've got 2 more questions here, because this I think I could answer, but I just want, if the area where a frequency is made available and there is a licensee who has not complied with the ICASA's requirements, can we, if we succeed to apply, take over the studio broadcast equipment from this licensee who's no longer in operation? If so, where do we apply to take over the equipment? To me, this has got nothing to do with ICASA, but I'd like your opinion on that.
Okay, David, you're 100% correct. It has nothing to do with ICASA. What you need to ascertain is who the owner of the studio equipment is. If the previous licensee had received a grant from the MDDA, that equipment belongs to the MDDA. You are then well within your rights, and it would be recommended that you approach the MDDA formally. You can first do that telephonically, and they will then guide you as to whom in MDDA can make the decision. and what the requirements will be, what information they require from you. And I think it would be welcomed by them, because to them it's a dead asset at the moment.
Yeah. Then, okay, just sorry, I picked up another one. Is the AGM required during the IPTR, ITPR process? When will the first AGM be required? Yeah, I think that's a question I've met before.
It's another interesting question. So let's consider the AGM. And again, there are some nuances to this. What ICASA requires, remember that in terms of the compliance to the community radio regulations, you're required to have an AGM, and the AGM must elect a board. So the community at the AGM will elect the board. But that's not always practical. So typically what happens is, let's say, for instance, that a group of interest, a number of individuals that are interested in starting the radio station get together and decide they want to start the radio station, and they then want to apply for the license. What they typically do as part of the application, you need a constitution or a memorandum of incorporation, whichever one applies. The law allows you, as the founding members, if I can term them such, to write that constitution and to accept the constitution and to submit that accepted constitution with your application. However, once you receive your license, you must now have an AGM, and you can do it before the 30th of June, but it's not compulsory. You must just indicate in your constitution document that here's the constitution. Obviously, that constitution must be compliant with the requirements of the community radio regulations. And you've got the signatories of at least 3 founding members or directors, as the case may be. And then you also need to state, both in the application and in the constitution document, that this constitution will be ratified by the members of the radio station at the first AGM. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's my comment on that one. That is the options that you have available.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It's sometimes easier heard than done, but thanks, Trevor. Just one last question here, which is possibly a big one, but an impossible one to answer fully. People are asking for some guideline in terms of policies, whether there are any templates. From ACM side, we do have some samples, but we are not necessarily convinced that they are actually the ultimate. Any comment from you on drawing up policies?
David, you're right. This is probably the most difficult question you've asked all day. Okay, let me just share with you some comment on policies. I have seen policies, to give you an example, just the HR policy, 40 pages. Absolutely detailed. It covers everything that you can possibly think of. An absolutely excellent document. What we need to consider here is it an overkill? Is it addressing too much detail? Remember, your policy is normally a guideline document. So your policy must basically cover do and don'ts. And typically, most of the policies that I've seen, and they're very acceptable, the content, etc., addresses all of the key issues. At most, run to 10 pages. Normally 3 to 5. It depends again. Typically, your financial policy will be quite detailed because it's necessary, and also because it covers revenue and purchases, or revenue and expenditure. It covers things like what you shouldn't do, good corporate governance principles, etc. So the financial policy is normally a fairly lengthy one. But for instance, your policy on, if I can just go back to that page, if you look at your social media policy, that just talks about what you may or may not do on social media. Your programming policy obviously must address programming aspects. Your editorial policy must ensure the independence of the radio station in terms of editorial policy. And I've seen political branding and affiliation, 1-pager, social media, 1-pager, editorial, normally about 3 pages, programming also about 3, financial 5 to 10, human resources 5 to 10, technical operations about a 3-pager. The content, of course, is the issue, because different radio stations will have different views in terms of what the policy should say. But the bottom line is it's a do or don't document. What you may do, what you may not do. And typically, if the repercussions of what you may not do is contained in your human resources policy under discipline. So even if I say in financial policy, you may not do this and this and this, I'm not going to say to you in that policy, if you do this wrong, this and this and this will happen. That will be addressed under human resources, under this disciplinary process. And that's also why the human resources policy is normally a 5 to 10-pager, because it has to cover recruitment, discipline, performance, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, I have, because obviously, as I've mentioned, I'm working with different applicants. So I have got an insight into what should be contained in most of the policies, but that I use when I assess each policy of the applicant to make sure that technical operations covers these important aspects, human resources covers these important aspects, and that's all I use as a yardstick. I don't dictate to the applicant what should be in there unless it's non-compliant. So for instance, if the applicant's human resources policy says that I can be the chairman of the board and the station manager, then I will point out that that's non-compliant in terms of the community radio regulations.
Thank you, Trevor. That is very, very helpful. We've kind of come to the end of our time. Just before I close off, another question here, but I think the answer is simple. Can an existing station apply for an additional license for a frequency offered in the current ITPR process in a neighboring town? I think the answer to that is no, but I'd like your opinion on that one.
Okay. My answer to that would be yes and no, David. Because remember what your license requirement says. It says that you must cover, the radio coverage must cover the community that you are serving. So if the community that you are serving is in an adjoining town and there is a frequency available, there's nothing to stop you from applying for it. There's nothing, let me put it slightly differently. There's nothing in terms of the ITPR application that says that an existing licensee may not apply. It doesn't say that. But it has conditions. So the condition says that my board and my management must live in the coverage area of the radio station. The community that I am serving must be in the same district municipality. My coverage may not extend across a district municipality border. So all of those conditions come into play. But yes, I believe that it is possible for an existing licensee to apply in terms of the ITPR, but then they have to prove the validity of their application. They have to prove that they are serving that community that is in the other town. You understand? And this is where the challenges may well come in.
No, that's an interesting challenge and a possible opportunity there.
Yes.
Trevor, thank you. I really appreciate this. I think, you know, it's, we've done more than I thought we would do. And I really thank you for that. I mean, I come away with a whole lot of questions that I had now been answered. I mean, I filled out many applications, none within the last 10 years. But in the previous 10 years, I probably filled out at least 20 or 30 applications for a CASA, particularly for event licenses, but they were much the same as a full license.
Correct.
But it's really been interesting to see the evolvement of the community license process. And I think that this is a good process going forward. And I thank you for your part in helping us to be able to be successful applicants. Just in terms of going forward with this series, next week, we'll hold another training session at the same time, creating effective Christian content by Brian Harris and John Bergman. If anyone here would like to register for those, you may do so. Trevor, let's keep in touch, and thank you so much for being part of this. And thank you to every participant for your participation and your good questions. And as I understand it, the slides and the presentation will be available to the paid up attendees from the ACM. Is that right, Natalie? Okay, thank you so much. I think it's time we went off.
Thank you, David. If I may just thank you again for the opportunity, and I do hope that all of the participants found the information useful. And as I indicated in the presentation, I do wish them the best with their applications. Thank you.
Thank you.